just not safe or practicable to go looking for bodies below the surface unless you've got a very specific small area to do it in. But then the decomposition process takes place, and gases within the body tend to then bring the body to the surface as it becomes more buoyant. And that process is somewhere between 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that. But it depends on a variety of factors, not least of which, are there any obstructions that could have kept the body below the surface? When left to its own devices, it would have come to the surface. And there are untold obstructions between Chelsea Bridge and Tower Pier. 15 bridges, road, rail and pedestrian, with various pillars and such like. At least 24, 25 very large jetties and piers, Westminster Pier, Embankment Pier, all the places where the TfL and sightseeing boats go from. 6 or 7 very large permanently moored vessels, HMS Belfast, Tattershall Castle, 8 or 9 huge industrial sites, including a waste transfer station, a pumping station, a Thames Tideway site, and getting on for 10 or 12 built-out areas where the shoreline has been built out, mostly held up with piles driven into the bed of the foreshore, all of which provide great opportunities for a body to get caught. So something over the norm is not at all surprising.
And yet, Peter, the Thames flows inexorably and the body has moved downstream. Now the body has been recovered. We've already heard that the body is unlikely to yield any information from the fingerprints, presumably, because the skin is too bloated to give a likely reading. Is that the case? And then I'm assuming now that more reliable and methods that cannot be done away with by perishing, such as dental records, they will now come into play.
Yeah, for sure. Dental records, DNA profiling, there'll be DNA still, loads of DNA around the body. There may be operations if there've been broken bones and things like that in the medical records. So there might be something consistent with that, as you say, dental records. So they will be able to establish beyond doubt that it's him. If it is him, what happens with the skin, I don't know if you've ever stayed a little too long in the bath, but your skin starts on your hands and whatever, starts to go white. And that's the beginning of the process whereby after a day or two, the whole skin will come away from the body and the prints are in the skin. So that renders fingerprints useless after a few days.
And that's because the outer skin is water can get into that and it lifts off, whereas a subcutaneous fat doesn't. And all these things are a part of the complex picture that officers will be working on. And Peter, you've worked on lots of these cases before. Presumably now this is bread and butter for the investigating police. They'll have a well-drilled set of formalities to follow.
Yeah, for sure. Putting the file together, getting all the things, all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. Getting things ready for a coroner, getting things ready for a review of the case, just to make sure there's nothing outstanding that needs to be done before it's put away. Yeah, well drilled and well practiced, and something that a relatively small number of officers will be tidying up for a relatively short period of time. The public are able to rest assured that he's not out there likely to do anything similar. His family, the victims and others are going to be able to know that he's not going to come back for them or anything like that. And so that'll give them peace of mind. Although if he's been part of their lives, the fact of his death can be an added distress for them. And that will be something that family liaison officers are taking into account and working to minimise.
Well, Peter Kirkham, thank you for joining us. And once again, giving us your expert insight. Peter Kirkham is a former senior investigating officer with the Metropolitan Police and had conducted a large number of these marine retrieval processes before and called this almost entirely right. You said that time ago on February the 9th. It'll be 10, 11 days before the body surfaced. And using evidence and experience and not internet conspiracy theories, Peter Kirkham, you were bang on. Thank you for your time. Always a pleasure. Now, time's running out on your chance to win £18,000 in cash in our latest Great British Giveaway as lines close this Friday. So make sure that you get your entry in on time. And here's how you could win that wonga.
It's the final week to see how you could be the winner of the Great British Giveaway. There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won, totally tax-free cash that you can do whatever you like with. That works out to be an extra £1,500 to play with each month for a whole year. You could put it towards monthly treats, save it for a rainy day, or just use it to take the pressure off in 2024. But hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 922. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Get stuck in. Lines close on Friday. Now, a recent poll found that the Conservative vote has collapsed in rural areas, having taken it for granted for many years, perhaps. So, was Rishi Sunak's appearance at the National Farmers Union conference today a desperate bid to get them on side, or a genuine show of support for a beleaguered industry? We'll have that next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. 2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. The time is 3:24 and you're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I have the latest on a story that this show has led the way on. Attempts to put more than 300 migrants into a luxury block of flats in Farnborough. Now, our exclusive photos from inside that development suggest that it's still being kitted out ahead of people moving in. But as we speak, ladies and gents, I'm getting sent information live from the scene, which appears to show the area being evacuated. In the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be speaking to a councillor from Rushmore Council who is saying that the development is being canned. And if that's the case, this will be a massive victory for a cohesive community that rallied together, did the right thing and said enough is enough. We do not want 300 asylum seekers placed in our community opposite a technical college of thousands of teenagers given bedding, sofas, microwaves, everything for free at the expense of the taxpayer in an area where their kids can't even afford to buy a flat. All of that coming up. It's going to be fantastic. But before that, Rishi Sunak has given farmers a simple message. I've got your back. Well, he's become the first Prime Minister to speak at the National Farmers Union annual conference. Now, this comes after a recent poll suggested that the Tory vote in rural areas is set to collapse.
So we'll also provide funding today, £15 million, to redirect that surplus into the hands of those who need it. So, in conclusion, supporting farmers, changing our approach and strengthening food security. And that's why I say to all of you and to Britain's farmers, just as I did in my very first speech in Parliament, I've got your back.
Well, we've all heard of a charm offensive. That's a farm offensive. And let's cross now to Birmingham, speak to our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, who was at the conference. Jack, welcome to the show. Rishi on a front foot, trying to convince the farmers to stick with the Conservatives. The big question is, Jack, how did that message land?
Well, certainly a mixed reaction from the room, Martin. Certainly a lot of the farmers that I've spoken to today, they are aware, of course, that this is an election year. This is a pivotal year. In fact, Minette Batters, the NFU president today, recognising of the importance of this year, how much, of course, this year could be important for the future of British farming as we head towards that inevitable general election. And these both Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem and other political parties around the country put together their manifestos. Of course, they are an apolitical union, the National Farmers Union, so they're looking for those key targets that they say, particularly this year, about backing British farming and backing farming being Britain's future around food sustainability, food security, highlighting here at the conference today how important, of course, that is. And Rishi Sunak trying to put his pitch to the farmers today that he is the man in charge to do that. Of course, the government committing tens of millions of pounds today, 427 million, the largest ever grant offer coming in the next financial year, more than 200 million pounds, of course, to try and increase the likes of productivity, and the likes of a 15 million pound fund to try and help tackle food waste. Rishi Sunak also today committing to that 2.4 billion pounds a year of funding to go towards farming. He says he's making sure that every single penny of that funding goes towards farming. He's committed to that, as well as now introducing what's called an annual UK-wide food security index. He does want that to become statutory when the time in Parliament allows, to essentially present the data every year to monitor those food security levels. He does want to make sure that the farmers know that they are celebrated by this government, they are backed by this government, as you heard him there at the end of his speech saying, I've got your back. But take a listen to what a few of the farmers told me in reaction to his speech.
The grants we'll look at them at getting new machines in and try and make life a bit easier with them, but the general public never really get to hear from farmers. saying like what we're going through and how it's difficult for us, so I think it's good.
I don't think he said anything out of miss. Yeah, the money would be good as long as they come through with it, but it's all money that we've already had, and it was taken away, so they're just giving us back what we already had previously. So, but yeah, I'm not sure.
It didn't answer some of the questions. I don't think sufficiently on things like storage of water, flooding. You know, we need to do more things like that.
Yes, as you heard there, a bit of a mixed reaction from some of the farmers to Rishi Sunak's promises and commitments today, but certainly not, resting on his laurels, trying to, reassure people in the room, particularly around the likes of labelling on food, that they are working with their partners across the European Union and across Europe. Of course, we're seeing those protests, aren't we, Martin, in the likes of Poland and Greece, particularly today. We've seen them in France and Germany over the past few weeks. Certainly doesn't want a repeat of those kind of protests here. We know that there have already been some, of course, down at the port of Dover around food imports, around the costs that they believe that farmers aren't getting a fair price. Labour certainly not escaping some criticism, though, either at this conference. Minette Batters in her speech talking about the Welsh Government's sustainable farming scheme. The farming schemes essentially reward farmers if they give up part of their land for maybe some more environmental or sustainable food projects. But in order to access that funding in Wales, 20% of farming land must be forfeited for the likes of tree planting and wildlife habitation. Rishi Sunak trying to commit that difference to the room today, that if a Conservative government was in charge after the next election, those kind of policies will not be introduced. Those mandatory levels of land for the likes of sustainable projects, they won't be introduced if Rishi Sunak is in power.
OK, Jack Carson, thank you very much. And I must say, looking very smart in your country squire attire there. We'll be debating this later on the show. Is it time for a farmers' revolt in Britain, a farmageddon, like we're seeing on the continent? We'll have all that coming up in the next hour. I'll be joined by a farmer, as I said, who'll give his verdict on what the Prime Minister has said today. Is it enough? And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. You've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country, so thank you very much. Tons to come between now and 4 o'clock, including live updates from Farnborough. Got some fantastic news for you. And it's also my view that Ursula von der Leyen has been a terrible president of the European Commission. But guess what? Now she wants another 5 years in that top plum job. What a fix. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. The headlines at 3:30. Police say they strongly believe a body recovered from the River Thames after a major search is that of chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. Earlier, police had said they believed Ezedi had gone into the River Thames at Chelsea Bridge based on CCTV evidence. The body was recovered by the Metropolitan Police's Marine Unit at around 4 o'clock yesterday after a report was received from the crew of a passing boat. The suspect's former partner, who was attacked alongside her 2 young daughters, remains in hospital, but we understand is no longer under sedation. The sentencing of a man who murdered 2 students and a school caretaker in Nottingham may have been unduly lenient, and it will now be reviewed by judges. That announcement from the Attorney General has been welcomed by the families of those who were killed. In a joint statement, they also called for the agencies previously involved with Valdo Calacane to be held to account for their serious failures. Rishi Sunak faces the prospect of another by-election after the MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benton, had his appeal against a suspension from Parliament dismissed. He was suspended in April 2023 after suggesting to an undercover reporter that he would be willing to break lobbying rules for money. He says he's deeply disappointed that his appeal has been rejected and criticised the authority of the Commons Standards Committee. Labour has now called for Benton to resign rather than wait for the outcome of a vote by MPs on his likely suspension. In the last hour, we've learned that the Body Shop is set to shut nearly half of its 198 UK shops. That's after falling into administration. It's understood that around 270 head office jobs will also be cut, in moves that administrators say they hope will re-energise the brand. The Body Shop employs around 2,200 people across the UK. And 3 Greenpeace protesters will be charged for criminal damage after a demonstration at Rishi Sunak's home in North Yorkshire last August. The Crown Prosecution Service says that after a review of the evidence provided to them by North Yorkshire Police, they have now authorised those criminal charges against 2 women, one aged 33, the other 32, and a man aged 38. Those are the headlines. For more, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a look at the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2655 and €1.1688. The price of gold is currently £1,602.14 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,720 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Sam. Now, the Attorney-General has confirmed she'll ask the Court of Appeal to review the sentence handed to Nottingham triple knife killer Valdo Colacano. Victoria Prentice thinks it was unduly lenient, and that will be music to the families of the bereaved. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has made her much-anticipated appearance before the Scottish COVID inquiry today. It comes after allegations emerged that she deleted key pandemic WhatsApp messages, used the pandemic to push her own political agenda. But let's just cast our mind back, shall we, to August 2021, when Sturgeon was asked if she'd hand over all her WhatsApps to the inquiry. Here we go.
I think if you understand statutory public inquiries, you would know that even if I wasn't prepared to give that assurance, which for the avoidance of doubt I am, then I wouldn't have the ability. This will be a judge-led statutory public inquiry.
Which, for the avoidance of doubt, I am. OK. Well, you weren't, were you? But fast forward to today, and she was much less forthcoming.
WhatsApp messages between yourself and Mr Yusuf and Ms Lloyd were produced by you. Where did you get them?
They were provided to me through the Scottish Government.
But did you delete them?
Yes.
Did you consider yourself, against that background and your considerable ministerial experience, to be precisely the right First Minister for the job?
No, that's not how I would have thought of it at all. There's a large part of me wishes that I hadn't been.
All right, then. I'm joined now by Tory MP Lee Anderson. Lee, are those just crocodile tears?
Well, it looks like crocodile tears to me, Patrick. I mean, first we had the missing camper van. Nobody knows where that is. Now we've got this nonsense. We've got these burner phones, dodgy £5 phones from wherever they bought them from, WhatsApp messages going missing. It all looks a little bit dodgy to me. I mean, she's bleating on there, she's crying on screen. This is not cutting no ice. You know, it's crocodile tears. It makes you wonder what the SNPs are all about, Patrick. It looks... I mean, the people that have burner phones, let's be clear, people that have these dodgy phones where you can't trace them and disappearing WhatsApp messages, these are normally criminals, these are drug dealers, and you know what, these SNPs are no better than criminals.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:38. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I'll talk about a bombshell new report that highlights the absolutely massive cost to the UK of jobless legal migrants. You will not believe the eye-watering figure. But before that, the families of the victims of triple killer Valdo Calacane say they're very glad that his sentence will be reviewed. Calacane pleaded guilty to the manslaughter by diminished responsibility of university students Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber, as well as school caretaker Ian Coates last July in Nottingham. Calacane was sentenced to an indefinite hospital order last month, but the Attorney General, Victoria Prentice, will now refer the sentence to the Court of Appeal after concluding it was unduly lenient. Well, I'm joined now in our Westminster studio by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, there's no easy way of saying this. This will be music to the ears of the family. At the time of Colacane's conviction, Ian Coates' son said, "This man has made a mockery of the system and he has got away with murder." Barnaby Webber's mum, Emma, said true justice was not served today. You have blood on your hands. This was given to us as a fait accompli. We trusted in our system foolishly, as it turns out. This has been a trial by doctors, and now it's being reviewed.
It is indeed being reviewed, and as you say, it'll be a huge relief to the victims of those families. You could sense on the day that Calacane was sentenced to this indefinite amount of time in a hospital unit that they were outraged, absolutely furious about this. Now that decision is going to be reviewed. It's going to the Court of Appeal. Victoria Prentice, who is the Attorney General, she's acting in her capacity here as a function of the judiciary rather than as a governmental employee. She's acting independently, and she has reviewed the evidence. There are lots of members of the public who have appealed to her to say that they believe that the sentence is unduly lenient, and as a result, it will now go to the Court of Appeal. Of course, the end result may end up being quite similar, because the judge said in his sentencing of Calacane that he would probably be spending the rest of his life in a secure hospital unit. If the sentence is reviewed and he gets a sentence for murder and ends up spending the rest of his life in prison, you could say that the end result is different. It is very similar, but the parents of Barnaby Webber in particular, I remember listening to Emma Webber talking about how it would mean a lot to them just to be able to say that their son was murdered, because that is, of course, what they believe happened.
And the three areas: insufficient evidence gathered from the family, aggregating factors, it was planned, it was premeditated, there's a large collection of weapons, and the sentencing of the hospital order didn't include a penal aspect under Section 45A, which meant that if Calacane reoffends inside, he can go to a more traditional nick. Olivia Utley, thank you very much for that update, a case we will watch all the time as it goes forward. Now, in a few minutes, I'll cross live to Farnborough for the latest on the battle to stop more than 300 migrants moving into a luxury block of flats. Hopefully, we'll have a fantastic result on that. Don't go anywhere. But first, in the GB News series Innovation Britain, we're looking at the successes of the British manufacturing industry around the country.
Reacting fire suppression have just won a huge contract out in Dubai, all because of their infrastructure that Ed here has created in Chelmsford. So tell me the story, Ed.
So we obviously produce fire systems for, one of the areas we produce fire systems for is vehicles. So what we're seeing across the world is a huge investment into the fire protection on vehicles. You're starting to see it more on social media. Battery fires are becoming a thing on buses and coaches. So, but for the most of the part, a lot of public transport is still diesel-based or gas-based. So we've run a massive retrofit campaign in Dubai. That involves a huge quantity of parts, systems, that involves a huge quantity of machine parts. And it's a big logistical challenge, not only to supply the systems, but for the guys and our partner out there to install them. But what the investment that we've done here enables us to do is produce the quantity of parts that we need to get out the door in order to do the supply. And it keeps, for me, the biggest important point with that contract and other contracts is by being here, we don't need to hold the stock levels like a lot of OEMs would for the inevitable, this order might come in, this order comes in. When we get a particular order in, we're just making the parts we need for that particular contract. So unlike with a subcontractor, I'd need to hold all of these parts in stock. I've now got a very dynamic stock system where big order comes in, we make the parts behind us.
There you have it.
Brilliant.
Thinking ahead of that, you're ahead of your game. You're thinking about future-proofing the business and the industry. Congratulations. I think you're going to do really well.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Marnie says being sexy in business is entirely possible and maybe even better.
Well, Marnie, this is something I say is true. I've had to live with this for quite a long time, and I think you can do both. Now, tell me, it's lovely to see you first of all.
Thank you for having me.
In all your gorgeousness. And you're telling me that often is regarded as something derogatory or something to hold you back. Is that right?
It's just this really unfair thing, this really unfair narrative that women can't do both. Even men can do it. As you know, Eamon, you can do it. You can do it all. And I just think, you know, women are so multifaceted. They can be mothers, they can be sexy, they can be businesswomen, they can be silly, they can be all these different dimensions. And this press push that we have to limit ourselves to one category, it's just unfair.
But do you think that is where some people may be wrong-footed or go wrong to underestimate you?
Exactly. There is that saying, disarm with charm. So, you know, that there is that idea that people do look at someone who cares about how they look, who's perhaps a bit feminine, and underestimate them. But hopefully I've proved that wasn't the case in the boardroom.
And thank goodness for Karen Brady. She's definitely upped the glam stakes on the show. And if anybody can prove that you can be sexy and successful in business, I suppose it's her, really. But where do you think most of the criticism comes from? Because I have to say, hard to believe, but when I was younger, I certainly got a bit of this at my old employer, being told that I had to dress a certain way, not to be too sexy, which I found hugely
you were told this by women.
I was told this by a female boss who didn't like me wearing zips on the back of my dress. Not just me, but some of the other presenters there. And I took such offence. I felt like she thought that I was some sort of, I don't know what. Do you take offence when people are criticising you that, you know, in some way they think you're, I don't know?
There's just no right answer. And as you said, I think Karen Brady is doing an excellent job at leading the charge that you can be glamorous and get the job done.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:46. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. At 4 o'clock, I'll have news of a massive development in the search for Abdul Ezedi, the man suspected of a chemical attack in South London. But before that, let's get on to a story we've been covering extensively on this show, as we said yesterday, and that's this: the plans to move hundreds of migrants into a new block of luxury flats in Farnborough. Locals have been peacefully protesting now for more than a month, and to discuss this case in depth and to see where we are, I'm now joined by local councillor Marina Munro. Marina, welcome to the show. So, 300 luxury flats in Farnborough were being given to asylum seekers. Locals were very disconcerted about this. They peacefully protested. They contacted and involved the local MP, Leo Doherty. A survey was conducted. 91% of people were against it. And can you conclude, can you confirm to us, Marina, that this development will stop?
Thank you very much for having me on your programme. I am the councillor for Empress Ward of the area, and we did take all these concerns the residents have in the local area to our MP, and with the assistance of the leader of Rushmore, Gareth Lyon, they kindly went to see the Home Secretary, and he has confirmed that he has stopped the plan of the asylum seekers moving into the building.
OK, well, Marina, I'm just showing some pictures on the screen now, and these are pictures from inside the units taken by somebody that got them to GBNews. I mean, we can see these are from yesterday, by the way. These are brand new beds wrapped in cellophane, brand new pots and pans, brand new quilts. We have a video outside, again from yesterday, of a container being unloaded and what appears to be duvets. Lots and lots of container full of duvets being ferried into, there we can see it there, duvets being ferried out of a container into the unit. This was just yesterday. Marina, does this look to you like a development that's been stopped?
It looks like I don't know what's happening there. I mean, I'd like to understand that a little bit further. But we
I can explain to you now that, as I said, that was bedding and duvets being unpacked yesterday and being taken into the block by workers, which looks to me and to the locals who I'm in contact with as we speak, they believe that the fitting out of these apartments clearly for single occupancy, single beds, is continuing. I'll put it to you again. Does this look like a development that's stopped, or is it continuing apace?
Nothing we have heard indicates that the programme has been reactivated. We're very grateful to the Home Secretary for stopping the plan, and our MP, Leo Doherty, would be pleased to update you, I'm sure.
Yeah, because the word that was used before was that the plan had been paused. And it was paused. It was paused for a couple of weeks. But as we can see now, again, images that we were taken less than half an hour ago from the site, Marina. This is a container being loaded onto a flatbed truck. This is either being taken away because the site is over with, or it's being taken away to be replaced by another one. So I just want to try and get confirmation from you that, for example, can you say that no asylum seekers will be ever moving into this block?
Well, to be honest, I'd like to pop down there and have a chat with them to find out what is going on, because as far as I'm concerned, the Home Secretary has stopped the plan. So I think, and I'm really, really grateful for him for doing this. I'm sure all our residents are. So I need to pop down there and have a chat and see what's going on. Our MP, Leo Doherty, would also be able to update you on the situation far better than I, because he has direct contact with the Home Secretary. He has been lobbying hard with him, and we're very grateful for the Home Secretary's intervention in stopping the plan.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on the show, Marina, and please don't think I'm being robust in my questioning. I'm simply asking on behalf of many, many locals that I've been very closely in touch with this past month, and they just want concrete, black or white confirmation of what's happening. So things being paused, things being stopped, that doesn't necessarily say that this won't ever go ahead. They do feel this has been kind of kicked down the road, the can has been kicked down the road, and after a couple of weeks it starts up again. And so you can understand their very real frustrations.
Yeah, I live in Farnborough too, so I totally understand how our residents are feeling. That's why I'm very grateful for you to allow me this moment to have this conversation with you, to let you know that the plan has been stopped by the Home Secretary. And are they the fixtures you're showing at the moment, are those people picketing at the moment outside the building, or are they historical?
No, so they were from 2 weekends ago, but I have been told that a protest will happen this Saturday, and that is because the locals, again, they don't necessarily believe that when they're told it's been stopped, it's been absolutely and utterly completely stopped. They feel it's being paused. The shots I've been putting on the screen there were from today and yesterday, showing of activity outside the blocks. But look, Marina Monroe, let's leave it there, and hopefully we can conclude that this has been stopped, but it's a subject we will keep a close eye on. And I really do appreciate you for joining us on the show today. Thank you very much. Now, moving on, as if having 5 years of Ursula von der Leyen as head of the European Commission wasn't bad enough, she wants another 5 years in the job. Von der Leyen had the role since July 2019. In fact, I was there when she was elected in. I voted against her. And despite all of the problems across the EU on her watch, it's thought that she's got the best chance of getting the job. And let's get the lowdown now, live from Brussels, the heart of the EU, and speak to Peter Klepper, who's editor-in-chief at Brussels Report. Welcome to the show, Peter. Peter, von der Leyen last time was elected in on a ticket of one, and once again she's been put forward as the sole candidate by the EU.
Yeah, it's actually looking likely that she will be nominated, not elected. She presents herself as a politician. She used to be a politician, not a very good one. I remember she was defense minister of Germany, which is now, whose army is in a very poor state. But ultimately, at the end of the day, she is a bureaucrat appointed by elected politicians. And unfortunately, it looks like a majority of them, because this is being decided by majority, will decide to appoint her again.
And Peter, this is coming in the face of massive expected anti-EU backlash against the European Union bloc.
Yes, you can see in the opinion polls increased opposition, specifically against the EU's green policies that are not only hurting farmers, this is widely documented, but also European industry, specifically German industry, is suffering badly from all kinds of net zero energy experiments, which has led to very high energy cost, which makes it very difficult for German industry to compete.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I'm afraid we have to leave it there simply because of time. Thanks for joining us. Now we have all the latest on the Ezedi case and, of course, Valdo Calicani after this. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. I'm Alex Berkill. We do have some drier weather across northern parts as we go through tonight, but for many it is going to be wet and wet into tomorrow too. A front that brought earlier rain across northern areas is now pushing its way southeastwards, and that's going to feed into southern parts through this evening, bringing a bit more cloud and some blustery winds and some rain for a time too. Clearer skies further north though, and across some parts of Scotland, those clear skies could allow for a touch of frost to start the night, but as this swathe of wet and windy and cloudy weather pushes in, temperatures are going to gradually lift through the night. So many places starting tomorrow morning on a mild note, but a wet one. Watch out for spray on the roads if you're heading out early on, because the rain is going to be heavy, could cause some travel disruption, especially in the southwest, and some flooding is possible here as well. Otherwise, the rain is gradually going to push its way towards the east, so by the time that we get to the afternoon, something a bit brighter, perhaps some sunny spells breaking out for many areas, albeit with a scattering of showers in a few places too. Temperatures still well above average for the time of year, but it will be windy, especially in the rain, risk of gales for some of us. More unsettled weather to come on Thursday, potential for some heavy bursts of rain, particularly across central parts as another front makes its way across the country. So again, we could see some localised issues in association with that. A showery day is likely on Friday. It does look like Saturday's going to be a bit drier, but temperatures dropping close to average for the time of year.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. Now, police strongly believe that they've found the body of chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi in the River Thames and will cross live to the scene. Next, protests and unrest over immigration in Ireland are happening apace, and I'll be joined by the man behind a superb new documentary on the truth behind the migrant crisis over on the Emerald Isle. And after a recent poll showed a massive fall in Tory supporters in the countryside, Rishi Sunak has told farmers today, "I've got your back." But did he do enough to win those voters back? Thank you for joining me on the show. Your company is always appreciated. A superb documentary has been filmed about the truth of the immigration epidemic that's happening in Ireland, largely ignored by the mainstream media. I've got the guy who made it coming into the studio to tell me he spoke to protesters, he spoke to politicians. There's a huge, huge social problem in Ireland. We'll have the full inside story and also a shocking report, £24 billion being spent on economically inactive migrants in the UK since 2020. Plus, we'll have Miriam Cates, MP, on why TikTok is warping young minds. Get in touch on any of those topics, all the usual ways. gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom today is that a body has been recovered in the River Thames, which detectives strongly believe is that of chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. Earlier, police said they believed Ezedi had gone into the river at Chelsea Bridge. That was based on CCTV evidence. The body was recovered by the Metropolitan Police's Marine Unit at around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon after a report from the crew of a passing boat. His former partner, who was attacked alongside her 2 daughters, remains in hospital but is no longer under sedation. Also in the news today, the sentence of a man who murdered 2 students and a school caretaker in Nottingham may have been unduly lenient and will now be reviewed by judges. Valdo Kalakane killed students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, as well as school caretaker Ian Coates in June last year. Their families welcomed today's announcement by the Attorney-General, saying they're hopeful for an outcome that will provide some of the appropriate justice they've been calling for. Prince William says fighting in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas must end as soon as possible, adding there's a desperate need for increased humanitarian support to Gaza. The Prince of Wales said he's deeply concerned about the terrible human cost of the conflict, with too many lives lost. It follows Lord Cameron's warning to Israel that the fighting needs to stop. Labour has also called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in a major shift in the party's stance on the war. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy says the world wants the fighting to stop.
The Rafah attack cannot go ahead. We are following our Five Eyes partners, Australia, New Zealand and Canada, who a few days ago made it clear that there has to be an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We are mirroring that language and indeed the language now of the United Nations. Everyone wants the fighting to stop.
Now, the Body Shop is set to shut nearly half of its 198 UK shops after falling into administration. It's understood around 270 head office jobs will also be cut in moves that administrators say they hope will re-energise the brand. The Body Shop employs around 2,200 people across the UK. The Prime Minister says a new funding package for farmers will protect the country's food security and ensure fairer pricing. Addressing the National Farmers Union conference in Birmingham, Rishi Sunak unveiled new funding to increase productivity and modernise technology such as robotics and solar power. He also pledged to cut red tape, making it easier for farmers to develop new buildings or open farm shops. Mr Sunak says Britain's farmers are essential to the country's food security.
One way to improve food security is to stop millions of tonnes of good, fresh farm food from going to waste, just because of its shape or size. So we'll also provide funding today, £15 million, to redirect that surplus into the hands of those who need it.
Rishi Sunak. Meanwhile, farmers have been giving their reaction to Mr Sunak's announcement, saying it all depends on whether or not the government will actually deliver.
The money would be good as long as they come through with it, but it's all money that we've already had, and it was taken away, so they're just giving us back what we already had previously.
It didn't answer some of the questions, I don't think, sufficiently on things like storage of water, flooding. You know, we need to do more things like that.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was positive. Have we heard enough? Possibly. Well, possibly not really, to be honest. It's all about delivering, isn't it, really, at the end of the day?
Lawyers for Julian Assange claim they have evidence that the United States developed a plan to try to either kill him or forcibly bring him back to America. Protesters have been gathered outside the Royal Courts of Justice in London today in support of the WikiLeaks founder, who's making his final appeal against extradition to the United States. It's part of his long-running ordeal, which could be his final chance to avoid spending the rest of his life in a US prison. 3 Greenpeace protesters will be charged for criminal damage after a demonstration at Rishi Sunak's home in North Yorkshire last August. The Crown Prosecution Service says that after a review of the evidence provided by North Yorkshire Police, they now have authorised criminal charges against 2 women aged 33 and 32 and a man aged 6:38. That's the news. For the latest news, do sign up for GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now we start with a huge development in the search for chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. And police now strongly believe his body has been found in the River Thames. Let's get straight now to our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, who is at the site where the body was recovered by the Thames. Theo, it was announced on February the 9th that the working hypothesis was that Abdul Ezedi had entered the Thames, and now 11 days later, it seems, his body has been recovered. What's the latest?
Yes, on that day, on the 9th, that was their main working hypothesis. And around 24 hours ago, here at the Tower Pier, passing by Marine Metropolitan Police team, saw a body in the water, and they strongly believe that it is the body of the chemical attack suspect, Abdul Ezedi. Now, of course, they are looking to establish whether it is him. They haven't been able to take fingerprints because the body which they have found has been in the water for some time, but they are now going to be working with a coroner so that they can take DNA tests and dental records to double check the identity. But they do say the clothes that he was wearing is strongly linked to those that they were seen on the night of the attack and the items that are found on his body. Now, we did hear from Commander John Saville, who's of the Metropolitan Police, and he said that their investigations are still ongoing at the moment, but they did provide an update on the health of the 31-year-old woman who was with her 2 children on that night of the attack, and they were injured. She's been in hospital since the attack, and she's no longer sedated, but she's now feeling better. They haven't been able to speak to her as of yet. Now, in the last couple of weeks, there have been questions towards the Metropolitan Police asking whether or not they've been following all reasonable lines of inquiry, which they say they have. Considering here in central London, there are CCTV cameras everywhere. We'd seen some of those at Tower Hill Station, which is just a few moments from here, actually. And that last CCTV we saw from just after 11:30, a few hours on the night of the attack at Chelsea Bridge. And of course, that's around 3 miles from where we are. We are here at the scene where they found the body. So investigations are continuing, and we'll be looking to hear further from the Metropolitan Police once they do have the confirmation that it is indeed Abdul Ezedi.
Thank you for that update live from the River Thames at the site of where that body was retrieved. And that's Theo Chikomba. Thank you for joining us. And I'm now joined by Kevin Hurley, who's a former Detective Chief Superintendent with the Metropolitan Police. Welcome to the show, Kevin. So, Kevin, 11 days ago, I beg your pardon, on February the 9th, it was believed that Abdul Ezedi had entered the River Thames at Chelsea Bridge, and now 11 days later the body emerges, and this is entirely in line with the trail of evidence, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And in fact, having dealt with bodies that have been recovered from the Thames or disappeared, what you find is after a period of time, the bacteria in the stomach, and as the body starts to decompose, they start to give off gases. So if the body was on the bottom somewhere, it basically blows up like a balloon and the person surfaces. It's pretty unpleasant for the people who had to recover him. It'll be unpleasant for those who had to take the body to the coroner's office, and it won't be much, well, that's the wrong word. It will be very unpleasant at the post-mortem because this body will be extremely swollen and bloated, and the smell would be fairly unpleasant. But as you heard, the way of identifying, of course, normally you'd use fingerprints perhaps, but if the fingers have been badly deteriorated, you can't get those. So they're now going to fall back on DNA and dental records. Dental records could prove a problem in this case, because this guy has been a peripatetic refugee who's moved around. It's quite possible that there are no dental records in the UK. So it will then come down to DNA, which, if they can work out, or to use the technical term, house him where he was last living, they can perhaps find his toothbrush or something similar, or comb, that will have particles of DNA on it, where they'll be able to prove it's him. But failing that, unless there's any known scars on him or tattoos, or known fractures in the body that have healed, perhaps it will be more difficult to identify this person. But if you look at him, that shirt is pretty distinctive, as is the coat over the top. So if they are saying by the clothes it looks like it's him, although I might add they'll be very, very distorted, it probably is him.
And Kevin, without getting too into the grisly details, although CSI fans will enjoy that aspect of it, that distinctive facial disfiguration that Ezedi had through apparently chemical being spilt on himself, will that be long gone now? Those superficial identification characteristics, will they be long gone? And now we are looking into that deeper DNA, dental and maybe bone-related evidence of identification.
I mean, it depends on three things, really. One, how deep that damage was into his flesh. Secondly, was he abraded as he moved about on the floor of the River Thames? You've got to remember it's very fast flowing, so it's quite possible parts of his skin will have come off as he's moved backwards and forwards, up and down, as the tide went in and out with that, or boats have moved by. He may have been hit by a boat or something. So there won't be so much to go on there in terms of identifying whether or not that will be there. And of course, quite frankly, marine life, such as fish, could well have had a nibble away on him as well. To get into the seamy details, it depends on how much is left, really.
And also the circuitous, the meandering nature of the Thames, not straight river, of course, and many, many obstacles between the point of entry and the point of discovery. But in terms of that methodical, evidence-based, meticulous combing through the evidence, where Ezedi has been found and where he went in is entirely conclusive with the kind of information, the backdrop that you guys, experts, will have.
I mean, the bottom line is if you go in the Thames upstream at Chelsea, where he appears to have done from the CCTV camera, it's very fast moving. It ebbs and flows all the time. You could end up anywhere in the kind of undertows and all kinds of currents moving in different directions, swirling around the different bridge piers, boats moving up and down the river. You really couldn't say how far downstream he has actually gone. And how far he's come back up. So you really can't say much at all about these movements in the water. Very unpredictable. And if the weather's changed, and I can't remember what the rain's been like in the last couple of weeks, if the tidal flow is really up there, it's going to be really moving fast and then coming back up. So it's about right. In fact, in a way, I'm surprised he's just been found by Tower Bridge and not further downstream, but then maybe the tide's just been coming back in when they found him and it's drifted him back up from perhaps Woolwich or somewhere down that way.
OK, Kevin Hurley, former Detective Chief Superintendent with the Metropolitan Police, thank you for your expert analysis on the body being recovered from the Thames. Believed to be, all the indications say Abdul Ezedi, the chemical attacker, has now been found. Of course, we'll have to wait for that formal identification, and we'll have lots more on this developing story at 5 o'clock. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. You helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country, so thank you very much. Now, it's the last week to enter our Great British Giveaway and your last chance to grab £18,000 tax-free in cold, hard cash. And here's all the details that you need to get your entry in on time.
It's the final week to see how you could be the winner of £18,000 in tax-free cash. That's like having an extra £1,500 each month for the next year. Listen to the moment we told Phil from West Yorkshire he'd won our last Great British Giveaway.
Hello? Phil, I've got some really good news for you. You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway. You're joking. That's brilliant news.
But hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
There you go, 18 grand and lines close on Friday. Now, a recent poll found that the Tory vote has collapsed in rural areas. So was Rishi Sunak's appearance at the National Farmers Union conference today a desperate bid to get them on side, or a genuine show of support for the industry? A farm offensive, as I'm calling it. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:20. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, later this hour, I'll tell you about an investigation into another claim of anti-Semitism in this country. Utterly sickening. But before that, a superb new documentary has found growing unrest over the level of immigration into Ireland. The Daily Telegraph filmed at a series of anti-immigration protests, and those who attended said they're unhappy with what they claim is a government open borders policy. And here's a clip from that documentary.
We're just fed up with the Irish government. We're just fed up with them. It's like a mass plantation what they're doing here. There's so many unvetted male people being brought over to this country, and they're planting them all in around schools, parks, and we're all feeling very unsafe. We're worried for our children.
we cannot sustain a huge number, that level of foreign people living within the borders of this country, many of which are living off social welfare because they're being attracted here because of the loose welfare laws and immigration laws of the state.
Look after the Irish.
That's what we need, more fearless documentary making. I'm joined now in the Westminster studio by the man who made that documentary, Michael Murphy. Michael, thank you so much for coming in. And again, thank you for shining a light on people who oftentimes politically have no voice. And indeed, they're attacked. Leo Varadkar would call these people far-right or fascist. But when you spoke to them, they're anything but.
No, they had very reasonable concerns about their communities being transformed, about their services being stretched too thin already, not needing to have an additional 1,000 or so asylum seekers, attending schools, hospitals, putting a strain on police, etc. So, yeah, it's a very different conversations that's had about this in the halls of power in Dublin and on the streets of deprived areas and cities and rural Ireland.
And when you look at some of the numbers, more than 26,000 asylum seekers over the past 2 years, a 200% increase since 2019. And yet, oftentimes when the locals raise legitimate concerns, as you highlight in your video, about safety, about overcrowding, about public services, they're simply swept aside as vile racists.
Yeah, so there's a playbook of either they're falling prey to misinformation, disinformation, it gets ratcheted up to they're far right or they're racist. I mean, it's nothing we haven't seen in this country before. And I think that, they've seen how it's panned out in Europe and Britain where, this conversation's been censored and they don't like where they're going.
And oftentimes, Michael, people who watch GB News, I cover this story a lot in Ireland, and they say, what is it about the Irish? They specifically decided to say enough is enough. What is it about the Irish spirit? They are out on the streets. They've been out there for many, many weeks, if not months now, and they are saying enough is enough. What is it about the Irish that's made them rise up like this?
Well, there's two things. One, whereas the frog has been boiling in this country for about 70 years, as with other continental European countries. In Ireland, this has all happened in about 20. So it's happened at breakneck speed. Everybody is, disorientated by how quickly this has been forced through. There's also the fact that Ireland's history is different to Britain's. They were founded as an ethnically nationalist state, and they had an anti-colonial struggle against what they saw as an overweening empire, which in that instance was the British. Now, they're starting to make parallels between European diktats on, say, mass migration or environmental regulations and a kind of colonial overbearingness that they associated with Britain. And a lot of the language you hear is, this is a new plantation.
And it's fascinating how you say this is the most volatile political landscape in Ireland since the Troubles. And indeed, we've seen arson attacks on the prospective sites for asylum seeker centres. We saw the streets burning, vehicles burning, buses, emergency vehicles burning in Dublin after a suspected migrant went on a stabbing rampage. And so this has happened very quickly and it's very volatile.
Yes, and I think if, any of your viewers are wondering where it's going to end up, you just have to look around the continent. You've got far-right parties or right-wing parties in the ascent in Austria, in France, in Poland, expected to storm ahead in the elections in June. And Ireland is looking like it's ripe for its own version of a populist revolt, as it were.
Yeah, and there's an excellent line that you end. And by the way, catch this video. It's on the Daily Telegraph website. Michael Murphy is the author. Please go and have a look. It's 15 minutes long. It's excellent. And it ends with the line, Ireland is a multiculturalist country ripe for a populist revolt. And that's precisely because the mainstream politicians, they're either sticking their hands over their ears, their heads in the sand, or outright they're attacking the people who dare to complain about this.
Yeah, so we hear a lot from politicians in Ireland that the Irish establishment are very concerned with how they appear from Europe. And I think maybe they should start thinking more about how Europe appears from Ireland. You know, Ireland is a very successful, prosperous country, didn't really have a sort of existential stakes politics up until this immigration issue reared its head, especially in the last few years. And they'd probably do well to, you know, look at Europe as a cautionary tale.
And we saw a brief clip there, Michael, of you speaking to some of the protesters, to concerned mothers in rural parts of Ireland, as well as on the outskirts and centre of Dublin. But what were people telling you? You know, when you were up close and personal, what kind of personal anecdotes were you getting to crystallise the sheer frustration they're feeling?
Well, some women were saying that they didn't feel safe to leave the house alone. They didn't feel like they could take their children to parks or benches in the middle of town because gangs of asylum seekers tended to loiter there in groups of 10 or 15. We didn't see that in our documentary, but we heard it enough to grant it some credence. We heard that people are, you know, finding it difficult to get hospital appointments. In Roscrea, if you call the police at night, it goes through to the next town, which is 20 minutes away. There's 7 policemen that work in that town. If you add in another 1,000 people, that's a serious strain. There's 33 children in some classes in Roscrea. Add 2 more children with language difficulties, and you know, everyone's going to have to move at the pace of the slowest kid in the class. So there's a sense that the island hasn't got its house in order, so why are they trying to save the world?
And you talk about the potential for a political populist revolt, yet the mainstream political parties in Ireland, they all seem very on page, on message with the multicultural dream, with open borders, with the progressive liberal aspects. Is that creating a vacuum?
Yeah, so recent polling suggests that around a third of Irish voters would consider voting for an anti-immigrant party or candidate. Now, in the absence of that party, which doesn't exist, there is no Farageist type politics in Ireland, really. It looks like independent MPs are going to run and do very well on an anti-immigration platform. Now, the election is a year away. A lot can happen in between then and now. But they're fooling around with forces that may turf them out of government or lead to some kind of disastrous Sinn Féin coalition.
And we've already seen evidence of violence flaring up, of arson attacks, of open riots on the streets. And you just feel, Michael, that if you don't address this, then you create a vacuum which always gets filled, and it can get filled with the bad actors. Why can't they just democratically listen to the people?
Well, the Irish government are want to remind the Irish public about their international obligations. They cite, you know, labyrinthine EU legislation about why they need to take asylum seekers. And, you know, that's stoking some anti-EU sentiment. People don't feel like they're in control of their lives. Someone put it even stronger to me the other day. They said, communities across the country feel like they're on a hijacked vehicle and they don't like where it's going.
Superb stuff. As I say, that's an excellent documentary. Michael Murphy, it's on the Daily Telegraph website. Please check it out. It really is an eye-opener. It's a fearless piece of journalism. We need much more of that. So well done to you, son. Right, there's lots more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. Later this hour, I'll be joined by Tory MP Miriam Cates. She's a former teacher, and she's warned that smartphones are doing irreversible damage to our children. What's more, the Chinese know all about it, and they don't care. In fact, they're happy. But first, here's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
The top stories this hour. Police say they strongly believe a body recovered from the River Thames after a major search is that of chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. Earlier, police say they believed Ezedi had gone into the River Thames at Chelsea Bridge based on CCTV evidence from around 4 hours after his attack on the 31st of January. The body was recovered by the Metropolitan Police's Marine Unit at around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon after a report from the crew of a passing boat. The sentencing of a man who murdered 2 students and a school caretaker in Nottingham may have been unduly lenient and will now be reviewed by judges. That announcement from the Attorney-General has been welcomed by the families of those who were killed. In a joint statement, they also called for the agencies previously involved with Kalakani to be held to account for their serious failures. Police in Leicester searching for a missing 2-year-old boy say they believe CCTV footage shows the moment he fell into the River Soar. The child was with his family on Sunday at the Aylstone Meadows local nature reserve when he fell into the river. It's understood the boy's father went in to try and rescue him but was unable to find him. The search is continuing. And 3 Greenpeace protesters will be charged for criminal damage after a demonstration at Rishi Sunak's home in North Yorkshire last August. The Crown Prosecution Service says that after a review of the evidence provided by North Yorkshire Police, they now have authorised criminal charges against 2 women and a man. Those are the latest news stories. For more, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now, a recent poll found that the Tory vote has collapsed in rural areas. So was Rishi Sunak's appearance at the National Farmers Union conference today a desperate bid to get them on side or a genuine show of support for the industry, a farm offensive? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
Comfortable ride, beautiful engines, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have 2, but I don't...
You used to have 2 SUVs?
Well, 1 SUV at a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you can run down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
Yeah, the growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks or, you know, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have,
exactly.
the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The time is 4:36 and you're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Later this hour, I'll bring you details of a passport application for a baby where her birth certificate was returned with the word Israel scribbled out. Her Jewish father says he feels like he's living in Nazi Germany. Concerning story. We'll have all the latest on that. But before that, Rishi Sunak has given farmers a simple message today. I've got your backs. He's become the first Prime Minister to speak at the National Farmers Union annual conference, and it comes after a recent poll suggested the Tory vote in rural areas is set to collapse.
So we'll also provide funding today, £15 million, to redirect that surplus into the hands of those who need it. So, in conclusion, supporting farmers, changing our approach, and strengthening food security. And that's why I say to all of you and to Britain's farmers, just as I did in my very first speech in Parliament, I've got your back.
So that's Rishi Sunak, the first Prime Minister since 2008 to speak at that NFU conference. But was it enough? Well, let's find out now and speak to agricultural journalist and farmer Bruce Jobson, who joins me on the show. Bruce, it often feels like the Conservatives have taken many votes for granted, the Red Wall vote, the Brexit vote, and now it's the farmers' vote, the rural vote. We've heard of a charm offensive. Today, Rishi was on a farm offensive. The question is, Bruce, is it enough?
No, absolutely not at all, Martin. Thanks for the invite. What we're seeing, maybe as an old cynic, I think we're either 12 weeks away or 12 months away from a general election. Now, when Mr. Sunak was Chancellor of the Exchequer, I was on this channel with Alistair and several others, and I said, you know, he's done nothing in the budget for farming. So all of a sudden, we've come along with this amount of money, which is not enough for farming. We've seen farming decline over the past 50 years. But if I can just tell you a little bit of why it's not going to happen at the moment, if we make a very simple mathematical show of it, if a farmer has 100 acres and he keeps 100 cows on the 100 acre, he now has to give up 20 acres, or 20% of his land, to meet the compliance, net zero, etc. So straight away, he's only got 80 cows left. Now, Mr. Sunak's talking about increasing production. You know, your cows cannot do that. You can't just do that. Most farmers are already losing between 10 and 13 pence a litre on their milk. Northern Ireland, as an example, the farmers there are getting the third lowest price in Europe. It's a disaster, and I think farmers are going to really struggle this year. I was on this channel with Alistair in December 2022, and I predicted what was going to happen, and we've been proven right. But you cannot reverse 50 years of national decline and just with a little bit of sticky tape in the hope that this is going to happen. Now, in that period of time, Martin, what has happened is we've dropped 40% production on vegetables. We've dropped another 40% on potatoes, if that's a separate crop. You know, we continually go on this track. Now, in the same time period, just over 50 years, we've cut back 30% of our production of food security. The US, using USDA, that's United States Department of Agriculture figures, has increased its output by 300%. We're seeing India, classic example, 1.4 million people, 1.4 billion people, and they've put a ban on the export of rice. In July last year, 2023, they've banned onions last month. They're putting a 40% export tax. Yet this country is just allowing a situation to develop over years of being complicit between government and supermarkets, and it's the farmers that have suffered.
OK, Bruce, well, we're seeing across the continent, and you mentioned there in India, farmers rising up against net zero targets, rising up against squeezed margins, globalism, retailers forcing their profits downwards and downwards and downwards. Is it time for a British-style Farmageddon?
Well, I used the word, I wrote it, Farmageddon, and I spoke about that with Alistair. But yeah, what I personally would not like to see is farmers getting involved in violent displays. I think, Martin, in fairness, your channel here has done a fantastic job, and we've had the support of the public. We don't want to support the people, we don't want to annoy the people who are supporting us. And that's what I always believe we should do. You know, we could go into supermarkets and protest, but not to infuriate the public. The farmers are doing a great job, and we're having a lot of meetings up and down the country at various locations. But, you know, the farmers are at breaking point, and it's not going to be easy for the farmers to convince the banks to loan them money. They're talking about getting these grants. But it's you know, by the time we get these grants through, we're probably going to have a completely different government. It's not going to apply. But I think farmers, we're now seeing the rebellion. I'll just give you a little mention. You talked about net zero. I think it was yesterday, Martin, you mentioned, I think you intimated that it hadn't been costed. Well, I wrote about it in 2019, and Mr. Hammond, the then Chancellor, said it was going to cost $1 trillion, or 44% of GDP. Now, Premier May disagreed and signed it in statute. So since then, last October, it has been recosted, and they now claim it's going to cost $2 trillion. But they haven't even got the infrastructure in place, and that's going to cost another $3 trillion. So straight away, within 3 or 4 years, we've gone literally from a figure, quote, of $1 trillion to $5 trillion. And it's
Okay,
not
well,
it's going
Bruce,
to be the expenses too much, Martin. They can't cope.
Bruce Jobson, you certainly know your onions. And listen, when you get your act together and the farmers get it going, please get in touch and we'll do our very best to make sure you get all the publicity you need. Bruce Jobson, thank you very much for getting in touch with us and being on the show today. Superb. Now, is this another shocking example of anti-Semitism in the UK? Well, a baby's birth certificate has been returned to her parents with the word Israel scribbled out. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to the show. The time is 4:46. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now at 5 o'clock, I'll have news of a massive development in the search for Abdul Ezedi, the man suspected of a chemical attack in South London. But could this be another shocking example of anti-Semitism that's rife in the UK? This time, a baby's birth certificate has been returned to her parents with the word Israel scribbled out. The family live in London, and the parents said the incident reminded them of 1930s Germany, where the Nazis would put notes on Jewish people's documentation. The Home Office says it's investigating this incident. I can now speak with GB News reporter Charlie Peters. Charlie, a shocking story and one that's now had the intervention of James Cleverly.
That's right, Martin. Actually, the father has spoken in the last hour to say that London doesn't feel like London anymore and that this is an unsafe time to be Jewish in Britain. Now, it's worth stressing that the father's name is Israel and the place of birth is also Israel, and that's what's been scrubbed out. So we should stress that there is a realistic possibility that this is a bureaucratic error. But the family and many commentators have alleged that this is an example of anti-Semitism. And so it's worth, I think, recognising the time of tension that this comes in, with the campaign against anti-Semitism saying that some 69% of Jewish people feel unsafe, showing signs of their Judaism in Britain at the moment. Over the weekend, we saw the legendary singer Amy Winehouse's statue defaced in Camden Town with a Palestinian flag pushed over the Star of David necklace she wears. The Star of David hexagram, of course, is central to the flag of Israel, but it has been recognised as a symbol primarily of Judaism for well over 100 years. And also over the weekend, the Community Security Trust, a charity that works to support Jews, saying that it recorded over 4,100 incidents of anti-Semitism in the year ending 2023, almost doubling the record it previously recorded 2 years prior of 2,200. So amid all of those controversial situations and those rises of anti-Semitism, we spoke to Environment Secretary Steve Barclay this morning, who said that the government was absolutely committed to stamping out anti-Semitism.
These are extremely concerning stories, and you're absolutely right to highlight them. I think we're all alarmed to see those sort of stories, and it is absolutely important that we get across that there is zero tolerance for that sort of behaviour. And I know the Home Secretary is absolutely committed to taking a robust stand in terms of rooting out any form of anti-Semitism, and that is something as a government we are absolutely committed to doing.
Well, the father of the girl whose birth certificate has now been invalidated says he wants anyone responsible for this to be sacked. But first, James Cleverly and his Home Office will conduct an investigation.
Thank you for that update, Charlie Peters, on that concerning story of more anti-Semitism in the UK. Thank you. Now to stark warning from Conservative MP Miriam Cates. She said that smartphones are doing irreversible damage to children and childhood. And she added that political indoctrination is rife on social media, pointing out that children spending hours a day on TikTok. And I'm delighted to say that Miriam Cates now joins me on the show. Miriam, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
Superb to have you. So an excellent piece, an eye-opening piece, and something that many, many parents will resonate with. Yesterday, the government brought in new smartphone guidance for the use in schools, and today you're specifically looking at how social media can be implanting bad ideas in impressionable young minds. Tell us more.
Well, I think there's a lot wrong with social media. It's not just about the political content on there. I think we're all aware of some very tragic cases that have happened over the last few years of children who sadly committed suicide following bullying and self-harm content and all those things. I think we're becoming increasingly aware of the wide range of harmful content that there is on social media. But one aspect is there is a lot of political material, particularly on TikTok. And we've just had the story about the rise of anti-Semitism in this country, and it's not a surprise because the amount of content that's being pushed on TikTok that's pro-Hamas, that's pro the Palestinian cause, that isn't necessarily balanced, that isn't necessarily following the same kind of Ofcom rules that you have to adhere to in other news channels. And if you look at the polling on young people's point of view on this particular issue, Israel-Palestine, it is completely different to the rest of the population in terms of how many people support each side. Now, of course, people are entitled to their point of view in a democracy, but it's worrying when an outside entity, TikTok, was owned by the Chinese, can have such a big influence on the political views of young people in this country. But it's not just, of course, the Middle East. When you look at something like environmentalism or critical race theory or any of these very contentious issues, they are being pushed on social media to our children. But I think that's one aspect of the harm of social media, but it's much, much more than that. The addiction, the self-harm, those kind of things as well.
And Miriam, you raise a fascinating point about the involvement of China. Are they complicit? Are they quite glad that young people in the Western world, not just in the UK, are being incredibly confused by transgenderism, by their role in the world, the pointlessness of it, climate change being a disaster story, and an astonishing story today, Miriam, emerged of the emergence of TikTok being used to convert young white children, aged sometimes as young as 8 or 9, to Islam, and that's being pushed through TikTok. How corrosive a force is TikTok, not just to young people, but to all of British society? And how complicit are the Chinese in this?
Well, British kids certainly spend more time on TikTok than a lot of other countries. I think the average child spends 2 hours a day on TikTok. But I mean, some American teens literally spend their entire life on TikTok, whereas the equivalent app in China is very restricted. The kind of content is very restricted, and the amount of time that children can spend on it is very restricted. So there clearly are differences in how it's being used in this country and how it's being used in China. Now, I wouldn't want to comment on the intent of the owners of TikTok, but certainly if you wanted to weaken Western democracy and weaken the future of Western civilization, then this would be a very good way of going about it, because it's generating the kind of belief in children and young people that Britain is a racist country, for example, that, you know, Britain is not worth fighting for, those kind of things, where, of course, in a democracy, we should be talking about these things. But to raise a generation of children not believing in Western civilization and not feeling particularly positive about Western democracy is clearly damaging to our country and to the West in general. So it's not a good thing from a political point of view, but it's also not a good thing for our children and young people to be spending so much time glued to their screens, not experiencing the other things of childhood and experiencing harm.
So, Miriam, we've identified a problem. What's the solution? We've seen in Florida, for example, they've introduced social media bans for 16-year-olds. The Tories are banning ciggies, banning vapes. Is social media next?
Well, I would certainly like to see the situation where social media is banned for under 16. I just don't think it's safe. I don't think any level of it is safe. I think it's naive to think that good parents could somehow control this content. They can't. Even if you don't give your child a phone, which is extremely difficult, they'd probably be the only child in a class without a phone. That's very, very difficult to achieve. Even if they don't have a phone, they can still view material on other children's phones. They're still subject to the kind of behaviours that other children are copying from the internet. So I think, of course, there are accusations. Is this another nanny state? And, you know, don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely opposed to the nanny state. I don't think teachers should be brushing children's teeth or anything like that. But I think in our society, we recognise that there are some products, some behaviours, some freedoms that are not appropriate for children. So, for example, smoking, alcohol, the age of sexual consent, the age at which you can drive. You know, we acknowledge that there are some things that children should not have access to. And I think we've reached the point where the threshold of harm means that they shouldn't have access to.
OK, thank you very much, Miriam Gates. We have to leave it there. Right, stick with us. We'll have all the latest on the Ezedi case and also...
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. I'm Alex Berkill. We do have some drier weather across northern parts as we go through tonight, but for many it is going to be wet and wet into tomorrow too. A front that brought earlier rain across northern areas is now pushing its way southeastwards, and that's going to feed into southern parts through this evening, bringing a bit more cloud and some blustery winds and some rain for a time too. Clearer skies further north though, and across some parts of Scotland, those clear skies could allow for a touch of frost to start the night, But as this swathe of wet and windy and cloudy weather pushes in, temperatures are going to gradually lift through the night. So many places starting tomorrow morning on a mild note, but a wet one. Watch out for spray on the roads if you're heading out early on, because the rain is going to be heavy, could cause some travel disruption, especially in the southwest, and some flooding is possible here as well. Otherwise, the rain is gradually going to push its way towards the east, so by the time that we get to the afternoon, something a bit brighter, perhaps some sunny spells breaking out for many areas, albeit with a scattering of showers in a few places too. Temperatures still well above average for the time of year, but it will be windy, especially in the rain, risk of gales for some of us. More unsettled weather to come on Thursday, potential for some heavy bursts of rain, particularly across central parts as another front makes its way across the country. So again, we could see some localised issues in association with that. A showery day's likely on Friday. It does look like Saturday's going to be a bit drier, but temperatures dropping close to average for the time of year.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, it's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. Coming up on the next hour, police now strongly believe that they found the body of chemical attack suspect Ezedi in the River Thames. We'll have an update from the officer heading up the investigation, as well as being live from the scene. And the cost of immigration to UK taxpayers. Well, a new report has a jaw-dropping figure for how much Brits have paid since 2020. You will not believe it, an astonishing £24 billion. And also, A message from Prince William: the fighting in the Middle East must stop. But really, should the future king be getting involved in such political matters? That's all coming up in your next hour. Thank you for joining me on the show this afternoon. Your company is always very much appreciated. I want to hear from you in all the usual ways. Please email gbviews@gbnews.com. We've cut off a ton of stuff today. You will not believe this report I'm about to cover. £24 billion since 2020 spent on economically inactive immigrants. What on earth is going on? The man who wrote that report is about to join me in the studio. But before that, it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. A body has been recovered in the River Thames, which detectives strongly believe is that of chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. Earlier, police said they believed Ezedi had gone into the river at Chelsea Bridge. That was based on CCTV evidence. His body was recovered by the Metropolitan Police's Marine Unit at around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon after a report from the crew of a passing boat. His former partner, who was attacked alongside her 2 young daughters, remains in hospital but is no longer under sedation. Met Police Commander John Saville says a formal identification will take time.
Because of the amount of time that the body has been in the water, it's not been obvious to do an easy visual identification or indeed get immediate fingerprints. However, with the very distinctive clothing that was being worn and the property that we found on the body, we are able to strongly believe that this is Abdul Ezedi.
Saville. Now, the sentence of a man who murdered 2 students and a school caretaker in Nottingham may have been unduly lenient and will now be reviewed by judges. Valdo Kalakane killed students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar and school caretaker Ian Coates in June last year. Their families welcomed today's announcement by the Attorney General, saying they're hopeful for an outcome that will provide some of the appropriate justice they've been calling for. Prince William says fighting in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas must end as soon as possible, adding there's a desperate need for increased humanitarian support for Gaza. The Prince of Wales said he's deeply concerned about the terrible human cost of the conflict, with too many lives lost. And that follows Lord Cameron's warning to Israel that fighting needs to stop. Labour has also called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in a major shift in the party's stance on the war. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy says the world wants the fighting to stop.
The Rafah attack cannot go ahead. We are following our Five Eyes partners, Australia, New Zealand and Canada, who a few days ago made it clear that there has to be an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We are mirroring that language and indeed the language now of the United Nations. Everyone wants the fighting to stop.
David Lammy. Now, police in Leicester searching for a missing 2-year-old boy say they believe CCTV footage shows the moment he fell into a river. The child was with his family on Sunday at the Aylstone Meadows local nature reserve when he fell into the River Soar. It's understood the boy's father went into the river to try to rescue him but was unable to locate him. Police say they're grateful for the local community's help in trying to solve the case.
This continues to be Leicestershire Police's #1 priority. We have now recovered CCTV imagery that we believe shows the moment when the little boy disappeared into the water. And we have been able to establish some further information from dog walkers and members of the local community. So we're very grateful for the support of the local community.
Birmingham City Council says it needs a bailout worth £1.25 billion as it looks to recover from effective bankruptcy. Council leaders say a combination of austerity and underfunding has hit the city hard. They're looking at selling assets to cover some of the expenses. But residents are also facing cuts across essential services, including adult social care, highway maintenance and assisted transport. Dimming street lights is expected to save around £900,000 annually, while cutting refuse collections to every 2 weeks could claw back £4 million a year. The Body Shop will shut nearly half of its 198 UK shops after falling into administration. It's understood that around 270 head office jobs will also be cut, in moves that administrators say they hope will re-energise the brand. The Body Shop employs around 2,200 people across the UK. The Prime Minister says a new funding package for farmers will protect the country's food security and ensure fairer pricing for farmers. Addressing the National Farmers Union Conference in Birmingham, Rishi Sunak unveiled new funding to increase productivity and modernise technology, such as robotics and solar power. He also pledged to cut red tape, making it easier for farmers to develop new buildings or even open farm shops. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now we start with a huge development in the search for chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. And police now strongly believe his body has been found in the River Thames. And we've just got this update from Metropolitan Police Commander John Saville.
I'm here to give an update in relation to our search for Mr. Ezedi. I can now confirm that about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, the 19th of February, a passenger boat on the Thames reported a sight of a body. Our Marine Support Unit attended the area around Tower Pier and recovered a man from the water. Because of the amount of time that the body has been in the water, it's not been obvious to do an easy visual identification or indeed get immediate fingerprints. However, with the very distinctive clothing that was being worn and the property that we found on the body, we are able to strongly believe that this is Abdul Ezedi. We have updated his family with those inquiries and given the detail about how we found him and where he is. We will now liaise with the coroner for a post-mortem and formal identification. That may take a few weeks to complete. Clearly there has been a horrific attack. A woman and a young family have been significantly injured, which will probably be with them for the rest of their lives. And now sadly a man has lost his life. I would like to continue to thank the members of the public who did come forward. It was incredibly helpful. A number of them were able to help direct our CCTV inquiries in order to be able to trace the movements of Ezedi on that evening. She is still very poorly. She is now in a stable condition and no longer sedated, but she's still too unwell to talk to police. We will obviously take the advice of the doctors about when she would be able to speak to us in order for us to find out more about what happened on the evening, and we will just wait to hear from the doctors. I believe it was a passenger boat. I don't know too much detail, but our Marine Support Unit are always out on the water and were able to quite quickly go to the area where they reported the sight of the body.
And that was Metropolitan Police Commander John Saville with the latest update on the hunt. The recovery of the body for Abdul Ezedi. And let's speak now with our national reporter Theo Chikomba. Theo, you're live at the scene on the Thames where that body was recovered. It now looks increasingly likely, the clothing, the evidence, everything backing up this is indeed Abdul Ezedi who's been fished out of the Thames.
Yeah, it's 19 days since the attack took place in Clapham, and police were following all lines of inquiry, which led to a national manhunt. We know that they were working with Northumbria Police in the northeast, and of course working with British Transport Police and many others as part of this investigation to establish the whereabouts of Abdul Ezedi. But on the 9th of February, in their last press conference at New Scotland Yard. They did confirm, saying that their main working hypothesis is that he went into the water. And since then, we do know that they had been searching on water and on land to establish whether or not he is in the water. On that day, on the 9th of February as well, they released CCTV footage of Abdul Ezedi, last seen on the Chelsea Bridge after he had gone into the Battersea Park area and then returning onto Chelsea Bridge. And they've been working since that time to establish what happened. But what we do know from today is that yesterday, just after 4 o'clock, there was a passing by boat, and then marine specialist unit from the Metropolitan Police came into this area.
With the author of the report, obviously, right?
At the scene. And then so we'll be hoping to find out any further information from the police in the coming days as they're looking to establish his formal identification, having found out that they can't look at the fingerprints, and they are looking to find out any further DNA information, working with the coroner.
OK, thank you very much. That was Theo Chikomba live at the River Thames there at the site where the body of who it's very much looking likely now, Abdul Ezedi, was recovered after 11 days in the River Thames, some 16 bridges further down through the circuitous route of the Thames, now being formally identified, and it will be things like DNA and dental records, because we believe the body will be too decomposed for a facial or fingerprint recognition. We'll have more on that, of course, throughout the evening as the story continues to develop. Now, a new report has revealed UK taxpayers have forked out almost £24 billion in jobless legal migrants since 2010, an astonishing figure. And this comes as the UK's porous legal system is being used to benefit millions arriving in the UK, claiming housing benefit, universal credit, child benefits and other handouts too. It's a simply mind-bending number, and joining me now to discuss this is our political correspondent Olivia Utley and the research director at the Centre for Migration Control, Robert Bates. Robert, let's start with you. So you put this report together at the Centre for Migration Control, £24 billion, stratospheric amounts of money. How did you work out the data?
You're right, it's absolutely flabbergasting number. I can't take credit for actually doing the calculations. The calculations were done by the ONS, the UK's official data body, through their labour force survey, which they release every quarter. And the findings, if you actually delve into the data, are quite simply startling. Last year, we saw a record number of migrants that are economically inactive in the UK at 1.13 million. 1 in 5 people that weren't born in the UK between the ages of 16 and 64 are now economically inactive. That doesn't mean that they're not currently in a role. It means that they are not in a role and they're not looking to find a role either.
And when you work out the numbers by looking at the general amount in provisions and handouts that each individual will get, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's between £8,082 and £9,168 per person per annum, and you've simply extrapolated that onto the numbers coming in, and that's how you reach your figure.
Well, exactly. We've actually been a lot more conservative than other estimates on what the expenditure per person is. I think the Treasury puts it at about 12,000, the IFS around a similar number as well. But we've wanted to really make sure that the figure is airtight and not reflective of things that perhaps aren't day-to-day spending, and that's why we reached a figure of about 8,000 to 9,000, depending on the year, depending on exactly how much is spent per capita. And, yeah, as you say, we've arrived at an absolutely staggering number.
And the figure could have been even higher if you'd included international students, I believe.
Exactly. So they are technically classed as economically inactive. It's a bit murkier with international students because obviously they do have to pay tuition fees. The data around whether they are a net contributor or a net cost to the exchequer is murky, and obviously people are reaching different conclusions depending on their political slant. But yes, you can, if you include international students, find that the figure rises to 36 billion.
Astonishing. Right, Robert, stick with us. Olivia, this flies in the face of everything that we've ever been told about the fact that immigration makes us richer, and they contribute more than they take out. These figures are mind-blowing figures. What political impact do you think this will have? We're approaching a general election where this is the kind of red ticket, issue. Immigration is becoming the biggest issue on the ticket. This will just make the whole thing chaotic. How can the government justify this?
Well, it's incredibly difficult for the
government. You will hear Rishi Sunak talking a lot about illegal migration, and we have talked ourselves blue about the Rwanda plan, but actually legal migration is a much, much bigger problem. 700,000 legal migrants to the UK last year. Now, some people say that, you can explain away a little bit of that with people who came over from Hong Kong, who came from Afghanistan, genuine refugees from Ukraine, etc. But that does not explain this colossal number. And obviously, it is completely unsustainable. The government is working to crack down on this. They have already tightened up some of those loopholes around legal migration to the UK. You have to now earn a specific amount to bring a spouse into the UK, £38,000. The threshold for what you have to earn to get over here as well has gone up. And the government is looking at cracking down on the number of dependents that students can bring when they come here from the UK. At the moment, it is up to 4 dependents per student. So there's a situation, of course, where there are at least some people who are doing a Mickey Mouse degree in the UK in order to bring their whole family over here. It's a really politically difficult situation for the government, and although they are now beginning to crack down on it, we won't see the effects of that crackdown for quite a long time to come. And Rishi Sunak is really running out of time on this. By the time we see the next migration stats, it'll be very, very close to the next election, and the effects of the legislation that they're putting in place now, the government, still won't be felt. So we will go into the next election with the migration figures just as high as they are at the moment.
And what's interesting, Rob, is that we covered a story yesterday where the immigration minister is putting forward his own information to the Home Office about the number of care visas that are being handed out, and the Home Office aren't even publishing. 13 reports haven't been published because they simply don't want to hear inconvenient truths. And so it relies upon people such as yourselves, at the director at the Centre for Migration Control, to put this data out. Have you presumably ran into quite a lot of flag?
Oh, yeah, as you say, the absolute story of research in this area is getting your hands on the data. It is nigh on impossible to get your hands on anything meaningful that actually paints the picture about the economic costs that migration brings. I mean, I think we're all starting to become familiar with the social costs and the costs on culture that come with mass migration. But the economic costs, we are just told emphatically, it is an economic benefit. You look at the bodies that are purporting that. The OBR holds a vice-like grip over the Treasury, over the Home Office and the Prime Minister, essentially, yet their sums are off by about 8 billion as well. So getting accurate data is nigh on impossible.
And do you think, Olivia, that we are now entering a period where, like I said, we saw yesterday 13 reports not published by the Home Office? I myself, and no doubt many other journalists that are in the game, have been putting the freedom of information requests in for this type of information. It's been routinely knocked back, saying it's not in the national interest, it could be damaging to departments or even the government itself to publish it. And then when we peel back the veneer and we see these figures, is there any wonder they don't want us to know if the figures are so eye-watering?
Well, absolutely, and it's not only the figures which are sort of hushed up like what you're talking about here, but it's also the figures that are put out but very, very quietly. So if you look at the recession figures from earlier this week, it was revealed that Britain had just about entered into a recession, a technical recession. The economy had shrunk by 0.3 or whatever. It doesn't sound like very much at all. But there were also, came out at the same time, the GDP per capita stats, which were so much worse. Individually, everyone in Britain is getting much poorer. And the reason, well, one of the reasons for that is that migration is going up and up and up. So yes, the economy will be growing a little bit as migration goes up, because there are some migrants, lots of migrants, who are working in jobs. But the amount of money per person isn't going up at all, because you've got all of these economically inactive migrants. So there are figures like that which come out and they are hushed up or not. The government does not draw attention to them. And as you say, it's not surprising, given that we will be going into an election in this unprecedented situation. David Cameron said really not very long ago that he wanted to get migration down to the tens of thousands. We're now up to 700,000 people a year.
And Rob Bates, final word to you. We covered a story a couple of weeks ago about the percentage of tax and benefits is now second only to the NHS in Britain, and we all thought, well, how can that be? Now we're seeing the truth. If a huge £24 billion has gone on this, on economically inactive migrants alone, this isn't sustainable.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, no. And the question is, as Olivia was discussing earlier, how does this get brought down? The government's plan to get numbers down dramatically barely scratches the surface. If anything, they reverse some of the damage that they've inflicted over the last 6 years, but it still doesn't get us back to a sustainable level, which brings opportunities, chances for training, skills for young people to get on the housing ladder. None of that exists in the current system.
An astonishing report. Robert Bates, Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control, thank you very much for joining us, and also, as ever, Olivia Utley. Superb stuff. Massively thought-provoking. Let us know what you think about that. Just get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com. I can barely believe it in myself. OK, let's move on, because time is running out on your chance to win £18,000 in cold, hard cash in our latest Great British Giveaway, and lines close this Friday. Make sure you get your entries in on time, and here's how you can make that wonga yours.
It's the final week to see how you could be the winner of the Great British Giveaway. There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won, totally tax-free cash that you can do whatever you like with. That works out to be an extra £1,500 to play with each month for a whole year. You could put it towards monthly treats, save it for a rainy day, or just use it to take the pressure off in 2024. But hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Get stuck in, and lines close on Friday. Now, Prince William has called for an end to the fighting in Gaza. Now, is this really something that the future king should be getting involved with? I'll be asking that next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out the stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods are.
And remember, a lot of people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, the profits... I think on Clarkson's Farm, I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something.
Right.
And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that have been passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. I am all for green protests, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tartar Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You've got to do it this way instead. Lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you say
can't
you
get any more
support
obvious.
some of these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message.
Any of them.
But I do appreciate the message. But sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:26. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Still to come on the show, motorists are calling on the government to finally reduce fuel duty, and we'll hear from one campaigner who's making that happen. But before that, the Prince of Wales was met with cries of free Palestine outside the British Red Cross HQ in central London today. Prince William was visiting aid workers providing humanitarian support in the Middle East. And this comes as His Royal Highness released a rare statement this afternoon emphasising that too many have been killed in the Israel-Gaza war. Well, GB News' royal correspondent Cameron Walker joins me now. Cameron, welcome to the show. There's only one question to ask, and that is why on earth is the Prince of Wales getting involved in the situation in the Middle East?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly bold of the Prince of Wales here. He called in his very strongly worded statement earlier today for fighting in the Israel-Hamas war to end as soon as possible. He also said it's critical that more aid gets in and that Hamas release the Israeli hostages. As I said, it's incredibly rare and strongly worded, but and he visited the Red Cross. But the timing is really significant here. There's fears about an escalation in the violence as Israeli forces move closer towards Rafah, that southern city in Gaza. There's also an SNP-led Gaza ceasefire motion scheduled in the House of Commons tomorrow. So it does, as you say, Martin, all sound very, very political. Prince William is future king. We live in a constitutional monarchy, and therefore he has to, and he knows this, he has to be politically neutral. But it does appear he is reflecting government policy here, and that is another requirement of a constitutional monarchy. And in fact, the UK government today has come out this afternoon and has welcomed Prince William's intervention. A Downing Street spokesperson has said that his message is consistent with the government position, and we welcome that intervention. It is important we speak with one voice as a nation. Now, it's understood, I'm told, that the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office was fully briefed on Prince William's engagements at the Red Cross and indeed his very strongly worded statement today. I'm getting the sense that the government is wanting to use Prince William as a very popular royal as a bit of an asset here. His power of soft diplomacy in action. In 2018, he became the first senior member of the royal family to visit both Israel and the occupied West Bank. And I'm told that he's followed the region closely ever since, and it's really touched him as a father, is what he said today. He is expected to also visit a synagogue in the next couple of weeks, focusing on the rise in anti-Semitism too. He's clearly trying not to take sides here, but there are many who are accusing him of straying dangerously close to that political line.
And Cameron, if you read the full statement from the Prince, it is politically balanced. He does talk about Hamas being terrorists. At least he went that far. The BBC didn't. But nevertheless, if you take comments out of context, which is what people do these days, plus the backdrop of that free Palestine chant as he left the Red Cross HQ, Cameron, a lot of people are going to be saying, is this really the kind of political messaging that a prince should be doing, or should they be keeping their nose clean?
Yeah, a lot of people are saying, why now? Why is he really releasing this statement now? Well, you have to remember, following the terrorist attack on October 7th, Prince William's spokesperson released an even more strongly worded statement, as you say, calling it a terrorist attack, first of all, but also saying that Israel is exercising its right of self-defence. Now, he did not repeat those remarks today, and clearly this has become a much more polarising, contentious issue. He was ambushed by one pro-Palestine protester earlier today, chanting Free Palestine, but Prince William is clearly wanting peace and trying to please both sides here. He really is talking about freeing the hostages, but also getting aid and humanitarian aid into Gaza, helping those innocent civilians as well. So it's a long way to go.
And it will all beg the question, because it's so sensitive in terms of its timing. There's a vote tomorrow on the SNP. The Labour Party may vote against Keir Starmer and ignore the whip. It is a hugely political issue spilling over. And I think, actually, Cameron Walker, we can now show that clip of those chants of Free Palestine as the Prince left the Red Cross HQ earlier. Let's have a look now. So, I mean, that doesn't in any way say that the Prince is endorsing that message, but nevertheless, he's putting himself in a position where he is political, and that's now happening in the background, and it will always get taken out of context, Cameron.
Yeah, and that's the problem with social media, really. Prince William very tactfully avoiding or at least ignoring that protester there. But Kensington Palace is stressing here that he really is really kind of shining a light on both sides. And as I said, in a few weeks, he is shining a spotlight on the global rise in anti-Semitism, talking to young people at a synagogue. But as you say, because it's all so complicated, there's certain sound bites or lines that he said which is being taken out of context or online. And I think we really need to delve in as to the timing, why he's done this, all the way back from 2018, visiting the region, to the statements he's made following October 7th. But of course, there is a long way to go. Prince William knows that. But what he's trying to do is stay neutral and shine a light on the human suffering that is happening in that region.
Great stuff, as ever, Cameron Walker. Is the Prince political or is he on point? Let me know what you think. And, of course, there's lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock. And I'll talk about the row between a man and a woman over £1 million scratch card win. They split up a few weeks later, and now Lottery Bosses says that she is getting all the money and he's left alone as a loser. But first, your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Let's bring you the top stories. We start with some breaking news. We understand the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, David Neal, has been sacked after he breached the terms of appointment and lost the confidence of the Home Secretary. Earlier on, we heard the Home Office say it was categorically rejecting reports that hundreds of high-risk flights had landed in the UK without security checks. Those flights included private jets arriving at London City Airport. This is a developing story, and we'll bring you more news on it as we get it. But that, at the moment, James Cleverly sacking David Neal, Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration. More detail later. In other news today, a body has been recovered in the River Thames, which detectives strongly believe, they say, is that of chemical attack suspect Abdul Ezedi. Earlier, police said they believed Ezedi had gone into the river at Chelsea Bridge based on CCTV evidence. The body was recovered by the Metropolitan Police's Marine Unit yesterday after a report from the crew of a passing boat. His former partner, who was attacked alongside her two daughters, remains in hospital but is no longer under sedation. Met Police Commander John Saville said earlier a formal identification will take some time. And the sentencing of a man who murdered two students and a school caretaker in Nottingham may have been unduly lenient and will now be reviewed by judges. The announcement from the Attorney-General has been welcomed by the families of those who were killed. In a joint statement, they also called for the agencies previously involved with Kalakani to also be held to account for their serious failures. And police in Leicester searching for a missing 2-year-old boy say they believe CCTV footage shows the moment he fell into a river. The child was out on a family outing at Aylstone Meadows local nature reserve when he fell into the River Soar. It's understood the boy's father went into the river to try to rescue him but couldn't find him. The search is continuing. And 3 Greenpeace protesters will be charged for criminal damage after a demonstration at Rishi Sunak's home in North Yorkshire last August. The Crown Prosecution Service says that after a review of the evidence provided by North Yorkshire Police, they've now authorised criminal charges against 2 women and a man. Those are the top stories. For more background, do sign up for GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
A quick snapshot of today's markets, and the pound buying you $1.2632 and €1.1685. The price of gold is £1,603 and 73 pence an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed for the day today, landing at 7,719 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. Now, the English language is a wonderful thing, and if you want proof of that, then just consider this. There are an incredible 546 words to describe being drunk. What's your favourite? We'll look into that next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:39. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, motorists are calling on Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to slash fuel duty. Campaigners from Fair Fuel UK have found that 2/3 of drivers want the Conservative government to slash that duty in next month's budget. But with continued inflationary pressures, reports suggest the Treasury isn't expected to lower taxes. Well, I'm joined now by the founder of Fair Fuel UK, Howard Cox. Welcome to the show, Howard. Always a pleasure. So, once again, the beleaguered motorist is asking for a bit of slack to be cut their way. Do you think the Chancellor will listen, or have the entire government surrendered to the zealotry of net zero?
Well, that's a good question. Hello, Martin. The problem we've got is that, we're in a cost of living crisis. And one of the most sensible ways of actually reducing or alleviating the pressure in the cost of living crisis is to actually lower the cost of filling up your car. The 37 million drivers in this country all vote. And if the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, decides to actually put up fuel duty, that would be more than political suicide. It'd be economic suicide. And we have to recognise that every aspect of our lives is involved with the cost of transport. And so I'm calling for it, and I've been calling it for 14, 15 years. We've managed to get a freeze in the last 14, 15 years. I'm delighted we've had that. But now's the time to actually cut it. And, we hear Rishi Sunak saying he wants to lead the way in various political issues. Why not lead the way in being one of the lowest tax motorists in the world?
And Howard, nobody has done more in Britain to get fuel duty down than you over the years. How much money have you saved motorists, would you reckon, if you add it all up?
Well, there's a difference called. I mean, if back in 2010, the Gordon Brown left a thing called a fuel price escalator, which meant that every year, the budget, there will be an increase in inflation plus 2 or 3 pence on top of that. And, if you actually analyse it, it's depending on the school of thought, it's everything from about 50p more we'd be paying at the pumps per litre up to £1 more per litre. So, yeah, I mean, we're talking about £200 billion worth of saving to the motorists. Obviously, the people, the eco-zealots and the environmentalists attack me for saying that sort of money could have gone into saving the NHS. No, what it's done is actually kept us out of a long-term recession, even though we've got one at the moment. The point is, if we actually put more money into people's pocket, Martin, you know better than anyone, they will spend it. That will actually stimulate business to invest, etc. And they will pay more growth taxes. So the Exchequer will win and everyone will be happy.
I mean, Howard, you're talking so much common sense, it'll never catch on. And isn't that the problem, Howard? Is the motorist now is just seen as a cash cow to bleed dry, add net zero on top of that, ULEZ, clean air zones. And even though motorists are screaming for a bit of welcome relief, it probably won't come.
No, I think my prediction is that he will leave it alone. The 5p cut in duty that Rishi Sunak gave us a few years back, I think that will remain. But the problem, we've got the Office of Budget Irresponsibility. Those particular bodies are actually saying that to actually pay for the national insurance cut we've just enjoyed or supposedly enjoyed, we'll have to put up fuel duty, put that 5p back up. That's what he's wrestling with. But come on, Mr. Jeremy Hunt, let's go for it. Let's really have some cojones and do the job and cut fuel duty by 20p. That's what I'm calling for. And as you know, I'm standing for London Mayor and I'm with Reform UK, and we are calling for a 20p cut in duty. I've been calling for it for the last 7 or 8 years. And look, if we did that, you imagine what that would do. A tank full of petrol for an average family motorist would be about 11, 12p cheaper. And what would they do? £12 cheaper. And what would you do with that 11 and 12 pounds? You name it, they would put it back into the economy, and that would stimulate the economy. It would flourish it would be incredible.
And Howard, there are millions and millions of motorists. We're seeing the farmers revolt across the continent and into India. When are the motorists going to start revolting and saying enough is enough?
Well, I've always been anti that sort of approach, gluing yourself to roads or blocking other people and impacting on people's lives unnecessary. You don't want to alienate the very people you're trying to help. So it could get to that stage. I mean, in the case of farmers, you're just right. They are being hit by high fuel costs too. They get the same problem. So a fuel duty cut for them, that means they could actually get a bit of profit, because at the moment they are struggling like mad, as we know, right across Europe. If we gave them cheaper fuel costs, they would put some money in their pocket and they'd spend it too.
OK, Howard Cox, we're going to have to leave it there. Keep up the great work, as ever. That's Howard Cox, the founder of Fair Fuel UK, fighting for the motorist to put some more pounds and pence back in your pocket, and goodness knows we need it. Now then, let's look ahead to another story. I'm going to look at the case of the woman who won £1 million on a scratch card and then split up with her partner. And he now wants a share of the winnings. It's a juicy one. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking: evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. There's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that, and police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment, and the bureaucracy, and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police, and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under, and of course the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force, and clearly a problem with the Home Secretary, who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back, 5:48. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. And let's get more now on this hour's big breaking news story. And it's this: the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, David Neal, has been sensationally sacked. And I'm joined in the studio now by GB News' political correspondent, Olivia Early. Olivia, we were literally talking about this in the last section. David Neal yesterday shone a light on the care visa scandal, on the numbers of people who were abusing the system. He claimed 13 other reports he put forward to the Home Office hadn't been published. Today, He's got the chop.
He has got the chop. It does feel a little bit as though he was a whistleblower and the Home Office just couldn't deal with it. We'll have to wait and see as more information comes out. Perhaps there is more to this story. The straw that broke the camel's back for the Home Office was a report that David Neil did with the Daily Mail yesterday, saying that the Home Office was failing to check the occupants of hundreds of private jets arriving in the UK. Tom Pursglove, the Immigration Minister, said that that is simply not true. And as a result, he had to terminate the contract with David Neil. He says that the recruitment process for a new chief of immigration is going on now. But this was a very sudden dismissal. No one saw it coming. It was only in the last few days, it seems, as though David Neil seemed to reach the end of his tether, as it were, and start speaking out about some of these problems which he's been experiencing from inside the Home Office.
And I wonder if, in the fullness of time, that will become the story. Here's a gentleman who started to speak a bit too loudly about some of the uncomfortable truths that he perceived were going on in the Home Office. Yesterday, I was astonished to learn 13 reports literally unpublished because they put forward information the Home Office doesn't want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Another element to this, which I think is quite interesting, is the sort of fraying relationship between this government and people like David Neil. You also had yesterday the story of Henry Staunton and Kemi Badenoch, very similar actually in nature. Kemi Badenoch, the business secretary, accused Henry Staunton of lying when he did this interview with the Sunday Times about claiming that the government was dragging its feet deliberately, giving compensation back to postmasters. Now, Kemi Badenoch accused him of lying, and there is now an ongoing fight. It feels as though this might well develop into something similar. It does seem a little bit as though we are living through the dying days of this government, and everyone around them knows it. They just can't get the respect that they need to govern anymore. People speaking to the press, leaking very deliberately and unashamedly, really.
Yeah, and Olivia, a superb development, and you have to wonder, this story will keep unrolling. There's a detail comes out, the Immigration Chief Inspector sacked, David Neil, getting perhaps a bit too close to the truth. We'll, of course, have more on that throughout the rest of the evening and tomorrow, no doubt. That is a huge story breaking. Immigration Chief Inspector sacked, David Neil, it would appear, for speaking a little bit too loudly on uncomfortable topics. Now, moving on, as Brits love a drink, and now linguists are discovering that virtually any English noun can be transformed into a drunkenym. And these words are things like trolleyed or bladdered or sozzled, which mean drunk, and researchers have found 546 of them in the English language. And meanwhile, an ex-couple are at war over a £1 million supposedly joint lotto win. Charlotte Cox bought the scratch card after her then partner, Michael, suggested that she played. But weeks after the purchase, 37-year-old Charlotte walked out on the relationship and was deemed to be the sole winner of that £1 million. So, should the former couple share the prize? Well, let's join now comedian Mike McLean, who joins us. Mike, one person is left holding the £1 million, one person is a loser. Does she have a point?
Well, yeah. I feel for him, if I'm really honest. I think he's escaped a lucky one there, really. They'd only been together 3 weeks. It was his idea to get the ticket, and a very good idea it was, which is backfired. She went in and got the ticket. What I really like about this story is the fact that she split up, but she didn't do the splitting up. But she got her friend to text him and split up because she was too busy spending the money that she had won on the lottery ticket. So she's not stupid, is she? I think it's wrong. I do feel for him because it was his idea. He, if it wasn't for that idea, she wouldn't have that money. So yeah, I do feel sorry for him. I also blame Camelot really because they should have just split it 50-50, and then. But at least she should just give him something, maybe 100,000, 150,000. She'd still have enough money to go and play and shop, and he didn't have enough money to buy a new car, or and they were planning on going on nice holidays and buying nice houses. He's not going on holiday now.
No, he's not. And Mike, maybe he'll hit the booze, and that brings on to this other story, 546 words for getting drunk. The Eskimos, the Inuit as they're now called, they got 50 words for snow. We got 10 times more money for getting drunk.
I know, it's my mum's Spanish, and her English is terrible. And in Spain, they have one word for drunk, and that's estaborracho, and just the one word. And you can see why my mum struggles to understand and speak the English language, because we have so many different sayings for one word. You know, she's just getting her head around now the he, him, them, they, and now I'm having to explain to her mum, you can actually just, rather than say you're drunk, you can say you were martined, or you can say you were wrapped, or you were faced, and she's still not understanding this, the poor thing.
Well,
only in England do we do that, though.
Yeah, I just think it goes to show how beautiful the English language is, and no doubt people out there have their favourites. And of course, Mike, too many of them are way too X-rated to mention on a family TV show. Mike McLean, thank you so much for joining us. Don't get too sozzled tonight, Captain. Look, thanks for joining us on the show today, and that's a huge story to watch. No doubt it's going to be followed up by Michelle Dewberry. She's on the channel next on Jubes & Co. David Neil, the immigration minister, he's been kicked out. He's had the boot. An amazing story. Thanks for joining us today, 3 till 6. I'll be back tomorrow, but after this, Michelle Dewberry is with Jubes & Go. Have a great evening.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. I'm Alex Burkill. We do have some drier weather across northern parts as we go through tonight, but for many it is going to be wet and wet into tomorrow too. A front that brought earlier rain across northern areas is now pushing its way southeastwards, and that's going to feed into southern parts through this evening, bringing a bit more cloud and some blustery winds and some rain for a time too. Clearer skies further north though, and across some parts of Scotland, those clear skies could allow for a touch of frost to start the night, but as this swathe of wet and windy and cloudy weather pushes in, temperatures are going to gradually lift through the night. So many places starting tomorrow morning on a mild note, but a wet one. Watch out for spray on the roads if you're heading out early on, because the rain is going to be heavy, could cause some travel disruption, especially in the southwest, and some flooding is possible here as well. Otherwise, the rain is gradually going to push its way towards the east, so by the time that we get to the afternoon, something a bit brighter, perhaps some sunny spells breaking out for many areas, albeit with a scattering of showers in a few places too. Temperatures still well above average for the time of year, but it will be windy, especially in the rain, risk of gales for some of us. More unsettled weather to come on Thursday, potential for some heavy bursts of rain, particularly across central parts as another front makes its way across the country. So again, we could see some localised issues in association with that. A showery day is likely on Friday. It does look like Saturday's going to be a bit drier, but temperatures dropping close to average for the time of year.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays